Today on r/ProRevenge. Say goodbye to your house and your retirement. This one is not technically my revenge, but some revenge I got to see up close and take joy from and slightly participate in. The background is most of the story, so this will be a little long. Trigger warning for self-harm. I was in the Navy and stationed on the submarine base in Connecticut. I had a friend I met in boot camp, and we were in the same class for our school, Navy job training. We'll call that friend Bill. Now Bill wasn't the most physically fit guy. He was short, kind of chubby, and wore glasses. However, Bill was really smart, and as the sonar technician he was meant to be, he would have been amazing. He had a pragmatic way of looking at things I really valued in a friend, and I know it would have made him successful if he had made it out to the fleet. While in school, we had a couple of petty officers that were hard asses. They somehow convinced themselves they were super soldiers despite the fact that our jobs in that field are really nerd-centric. You get picked for that job because of your math and computer skills, not your deadlift number. Still, they were both all about being fit and working out all the time. We would do physical training 3 times a week, and while most of us could keep up, Bill often fell behind on runs or didn't quite meet what these two idiots believed to be the standard. To be clear, Bill did pass the minimum requirements for fitness, he just didn't go as extreme as these guys. Side note for other Navy vets, he got the McCon coin for how hard he pushed himself at PT the day he visited. The end result was that they would constantly berate and belittle Bill. They'd call him fat, lazy, and everything else. They'd tell him he should not alive himself, you name it. They were always on his behind despite him passing his assessments. At some point, Bill pushed himself too hard and injured his knee. He told these petty officers he was injured and had been seen by the doc on base. The doc had put him on light duty so the knee could recover. He had the paperwork to back it up. They elected to ignore that and threatened him with kicking him out if he didn't do the workouts. So Bill kept pushing himself, injuring himself more, and his mental health degraded the whole time. In my time in the Navy, you didn't get mental health services really. The only person to talk to like that was the chaplain. For those who don't know, the chaplain is the religious leader, usually a pastor, priest, rabbi that has signed up as a commissioned officer. Our chaplain was the sweetest little woman you ever met, but as a chaplain she held the rank of captain, high-ranking officer. So Bill set up a meeting with the chaplain to talk about things. When Bill informed the petty officers he would be missing class the next day for his chaplain meeting, they yelled at and berated him more. They called him a wuss, useless, not fit for the Navy, and everything else you can imagine. They convinced Bill he was being weak and the chaplain wouldn't care about his issues, that nobody would care. They promised to make life even harder if he didn't show the next day. So he canceled his meeting. Evidently, bad luck hit, and that night his girlfriend was also breaking it off with him. She wasn't worth his time or money, but he couldn't see that. That night I awoke to a 3:00 a.m. call from Bill. I couldn't hear anything and I asked several times, "Bill, you there? Are you okay?" It wouldn't have been the first time that I got a drunk dial from one of my friends after a hard day like Bill had. Sailors have been known to drown their sorrows a bit. Eventually I figured it was a butt dial or drunk dial and hung up and went back to bed. I still regret that decision. The next day, all hell broke loose. Me and a couple other friends got calls from Bill's now ex-girlfriend, informing us he was in the hospital because he tried to not alive himself by injuring his throat. Turned out a few of us got that 3:00 a.m. call, but Bill couldn't speak at the time and was kind of out of it due to blood loss. We finished what we had to do on base and rushed over to the hospital. As we got there, the chaplain was on her way out and we passed her in the hallway. She spoke to us briefly to say that Bill would be okay, and she wouldn't forget this. I have never seen a look on someone's face that so accurately depicted raw, unfiltered rage. It took us all by surprise because she was such a small, sweet, and personable lady. But the look in her eyes, you could just tell she wanted someone to pay for this. She wanted revenge, and we all knew she wore the kind of rank that could get it done. We visited Bill, who could barely talk, but he told us the story of what had happened, what he was thinking at the time, and how glad he was it didn't work. Apparently it was cold enough that the blood clotted on the outside of his neck and made a kind of patch that kept him alive long enough for the M's to find him and get him to a hospital. The doctor said he missed his carotid by about a millimeter. A week went by and we hadn't heard anything until we got called in by the chief of the training command, the boss to these petty officers. He said he wanted to check on the rest of us and make sure there weren't any other issues with these guys he wasn't aware of, and that we were all okay. I let him know about a behind chewing he gave me a few months back, that I was really set up by these guys and they lied to him. My friends cited a couple other examples of their own with these guys being generally bad, dishonest people. I don't think it mattered. I think their fates were already sealed, and we were being asked for more ammo to bury them with. The next day they were nowhere to be found, and we were introduced to new instructors who would be taking over our training permanently. After class, I decided to stop by and ask the chaplain what happened. She told me she had never been more disgusted by the actions of a sailor than these two guys who convinced someone not to come see her. She teared up a bit, regretting that she didn't get the chance to help Bill before he made his attempt. In her mind, it was these two that precipitated and enabled Bill's attempt. So, on to the revenge. The chaplain told me she went to the admiral in charge of the entire base and demanded their immediate discharge. He granted it. Both petty officers were immediately processed out with dishonorable discharges. I can't remember the exact charge I heard they cited for it, but I know the Navy has a way of selling BS on paper when they want a certain outcome. Especially officers at that high level. So basically they get no VA benefits of any kind, got kicked out of the base housing they lived in, and could probably only find work at a gas station or under the table stuff somewhere. Also, I know from someone else who got the boot that the Navy only pays for a single bus ticket to get you back home, not your family or any of your belongings. When you have a discharge like that, no company with DOD contracts is allowed to hire you. That includes McDonald's because they have stores on bases throughout the country. Taco Bell, Subway, etc., none of them will give you a job. They can't and they don't want to anyway. So I don't know where these guys went or what become of them, but I know their lives were irrevocably ruined. One of them had about 18 years in, so he was 2 years from retirement and lost it all. The other was at about 12 years, so he also lost a lot. Wherever they are now, I'd be very surprised to hear they're making more than minimum wage. As for Bill? While he made a full recovery, he got a full medical discharge. Which is an honorable discharge that meant a 5 pay for the rest of his life, full benefits, and a referral to a counselor in his home state once he got back there. All paid for by the Navy. We lost touch over the years, but I did see on Facebook he got himself together, became a police officer, and got married. Our last story for today. Try and get my team member fired, get deported. I am not sure if this is pro-revenge, so I will let you all decide. I will say in advance, sorry for the long one, but the backstory is relevant. Back in the early 2010s, I started working for a big internet-based company in the UK. The company was opening a new office with a new subdivision in London. When I started, there were 2 team leaders and the office manager. The 2 teams were the content team and the SEO, search engine optimization, team TAO. I was recruited to be the development team lead, that is web development. When I was interviewed for the job, both the office manager and SEO team lead were carrying out the interview. As you do in interviews, when they asked if this or that could be done, I would respond, "Nice, of course." Or you would get a better result doing X, Y, or Z. So I got offered the job, and for the first year there was so much going on. As well as building a team, I also had a portfolio of websites that needed to be redeveloped and redesigned. It was at this point that some red flags started to pop up. I would have the SEO team lead, we will call him Andy, coming to me and telling me that I needed to do things the way he wanted. I would always push back and say no, and give a reason why I was doing things the way I was. Andy would get irate and would complain to the office manager about me. When the office manager would ask me about it, I would explain what had happened, and why I had said no, and the office manager would leave it there because at the end of the day, I was the one with the experience in web development, not Andy. This happened a few times over the first year, and I then realized that the reason that Andy was getting so irate was because he thought that I would be a yes man to him. Sorry buddy, that is not who I am. So now that we have the backstory, let's get into what led to the revenge. Me and the team had been working hard to get 2 of the new websites completed, and I was due to show them off to the board before they went live. This company's head office was in another part of the country, and I had to leave the office in London at about lunchtime. So I arrived to the hotel that is across the road from the head office about 4 p.m. and jump on my laptop to start going through the sites to run some tests. I was testing functionality, making sure the look and feel were correct, things like that. Then it happened, we found a major bug that caused a major issue with the functionality of the website. So it is at this point that I am going to introduce the star of our story, Johnny, not real name, but attacked all the same, who is my senior developer. Me and Johnny working through the night, me in the hotel room and him in the London office. We finally fixed the bug, about 7 a.m. the following day. My meeting with the board was at 10 a.m., so after getting showered, feed, and over to the office, I started my day with 0 hours sleep. I go into the meeting and the first thing that is said is the CEO asking if I was okay. I had met him a few times and he was a really nice guy. I explained that we had found an issue with the sites yesterday and me and Johnny had worked through the night to fix it before the meeting. Long story short, everyone was really impressed and loved the new sites. At the end of the meeting, the CEO pulled me aside and thanked me for everything, and then told me to go home and get some sleep. It was about a 3-hour train ride to London, and then another hour home. I thanked him and went on my way. So, after taking my team out for a well-deserved lunch to say thank you, the office manager then organized a night out for the whole office to celebrate on the following Friday. We started off at a fancy bar, not my sort of thing, I am a man of cheap tastes, and then everyone moves on to a small club. I go to the club for a bit, but then leave quite early in the night as I need to get a train home. I say my byes and then head home. I come into the office on the Monday and there is something going on. I speak with Emma, not real name, the content team's lead. She does not know what is going on, but there are people from head office, HR and others. Then a few minutes later, all the team leaders are called into a meeting. We are all squished in one of the small meeting rooms. There is office manager, 2 members of the HR team from head office, and the 3 team leaders, including myself. So, HR explained that there has been a complaint made against Johnny. A member of the SIO team, we will call him Mark, had called Andy on the Friday saying that Johnny had been making racist comments while everyone was out at the club. Both myself and Emma were taken aback. This was not like Johnny. On a side note, I felt that I need to explain the races of people involved. This is just for context and not an attack on anyone involved. Johnny, Emma, and I are white British. Andy is African, born in Britain, I believe, and Mark is Indian, once again, I believe. So, the whole day was spent with HR doing interviews with the other people that were there that night, and we then all reconvened towards the end of the day. The result of the interviews were that no one had heard anything like what Mark was saying. So it was Mark's word against Johnny's. This was not acceptable for Andy. He wanted Johnny fired and cried we could not have someone like that in the office. So both Emma and I looked at each other and know that it was strange that he was so instant on firing Johnny with no evidence. Both the office manager and HR agreed, and Johnny was let off with a warning and to be aware in the future of how things he says that could be misinterpreted. Life went back to normal in the office, that is until about 2 months later. The story of what had happened had gone round the office, about 12 people. Then one afternoon I was pulled aside by one of the guys on the content team, and he said that he had overheard Andy and Mark talking and thought I should know. We went into one of the meeting rooms and he laid everything out. What I heard made my blood boil, and I think had I been in a cartoon steam would have been erupting from my ears. He told me that the racism complaint was faked, and a plan that Andy had to attack my team because I would not bend to his demands. Him and Mark were on a call outside the club. Andy was not there that night. And that is when he heard what they were doing. It later came out that their plan was to make the complaint against Johnny and get him fired, which would then lead on to Andy complaining that I was not fit to run a team if I let that sort of this happen under my leadership. My first question was why he didn't bring this up with HR in the interviews. He said that he did, but it was his word against both Andy and Mark. I thanked him for this and went on with what I was doing. I was pissed. There was no way that I was going to let this slide, but I knew that if I was going to go after them, I needed to have everything in place beforehand. I didn't tell Johnny what I had been told, and asked the guy that told me to keep it to himself for now. I didn't want Johnny to get pissed off and do something that would get him fired or worse affect any revenge I could dish out. So, I watched. I watched everything the SAO team did and didn't do. Then it happened. It was like angels had descended from heaven to deliver me the winning lottery ticket. The building we were in was a 3-story building with a main stairwell with a door on each floor to the offices. The stairwell also led to a door out to the street. At the time I was a casual smoker and used it to get a break from the screen and clear my head if something I was working on was not going well. So I walk out of the door to the office and into the stairwell, and who is there? Mark of all people. He is on the phone, and he goes white as a sheet when he sees me. Now he is mid-sentence with the person on the other end of the phone, and as I am walking past he is forced to carry on the conversation. I overhear, and from what he is saying I can tell that he is talking to a school or something like that. The conversation sounding like he was looking for information about applying and about a visa. I thought that was a strange call to be having, and something was fishy about it. I had my suspicions as to what was going on, but nothing concrete at this time. A few days later, I was heading back up to the head office, and by that time, we had a new office manager who lived near the head office, so was based there most of the time. When I got there, I dropped my things off at the hotel and headed over to the office. I went to his desk and asked to have a quick chat. I explained to him what I had overheard Mark talking about on the phone and said that maybe the company might like to look at his visa status. So, a week went by, and nothing seemed to happen. Then, bam. He stopped showing up to the office. A few days later I got told what had happened from one of the other SAO team members. Mark had been fired with immediate effect for no longer having the correct visa to work in the UK. The company did not want to get involved in sponsoring a new visa for him, I don't know why. I started asking questions around the office, random chit-chat, and I found out that Mark is from Dubai and he was here on his wife's student visa. I don't know how that works, but it was all above board. I also found out that his wife's course had finished and that left them with a small window of time to get a new visa. That is when it all clicked. Now there are some doggy people in London and everywhere else, and they would set up these fake colleges that would sign people up to get visas to live and work in to UKIO. At some point before or after this saw a program on this, and normally these were set up in tiny offices that you couldn't swing a cat in, let alone be a college. They were used as postal address for the college, and they would charge a course fee to be enrolled and thus be able to apply for a student visa. So what Mark was trying to do is to get enrolled in one of these colleges so that he could stay in the UK and carry on working. I found out a few weeks later that Mark and his wife did have to leave the UK and go back to Dubai because he didn't have any money coming in to pay for his new college course. Bye, Mark. When I found out that Mark had been let go, I pulled Johnny aside and filled him in on everything. He could not believe it and was stunned that they would try and do that. I apologized to him, as it was my fault that he had been targeted by them in a way to get at me. He would not accept it and said that I had gone above and beyond in defending him. Following on from this, I made it quite clear to Andy that I know what he and Mark had done, and I would not be forgetting it and to watch his back. I made sure we were not in earshot of anyone else. About 2 months later, Andy handed in his notice and left the company, never to be seen or heard from again. I have told this story to some people over the years, and I have been asked so many times if I feel guilty for what I did. I always respond the same way. I feel guilty that Johnny was wrongfully accused and targeted. I don't feel guilty about what I did to Mark. You don't mess with my friends, family, or team. And those are all the stories we have for today. See you tomorrow.